The Wordsmythe Chronicles, Book 1, Returning Home, by Matthew Marler. Dedication. My thanks goes out to those who've encouraged me every grudgingly taken step in this journey, especially my editors, Allison Craig and Lauren Bovin, and my broader family. That gratitude aside, all the editing, classes, workshops, painstaking review, or beta readers wouldn't have mattered in the slightest had my consistently loving wife not been the perfect cheerleader the whole way. My thanks in advance to all those who will read this and share the fantastical dreams I have tried to interpret in print. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 1. Jonathan Smith bolted awake as his alarm clock brought him out of a deep slumber. Shocked and irritated at having been interrupted right in the middle of a strange reoccurring dream, he glared at his clock. "Stop," he grunted, as if that was going to matter, and it had been the clock's fault he'd been awoken. The alarm quit immediately, and the clock lay still and silent on his nightstand. Jonathan sat up straighter in his bed, puzzled. Did that just happen? It couldn't have. His sleep-fogged brain must be playing tricks on him. Getting up out of bed, he looked once more at the clock just to see if it would start ringing again. Obviously, there must be some logical explanation. He was just too groggy to see it at the moment. The clock resumed its comforting ticking sound a moment later. Maybe the ringing had upset something internally, and it had reset. That had to be it. Feeling better, he quickly leapt out of bed and looked around his room for the long johns, thick... Chapter 1. Jonathan Smith bolted awake as his alarm clock brought him out of a deep slumber. Shocked and irritated at having been interrupted right in the middle of a strange reoccurring dream, he glared at his clock. "Stop," he grunted, as if that was going to matter, and it had been the clock's fault he'd been awoken. The alarm quit immediately, and the clock lay still and silent on his nightstand. Jonathan sat up straighter in his bed, puzzled. Did that just happen? It couldn't have. His sleep-fogged brain must be playing tricks on him. Getting up out of bed, he looked once more at the clock just to see if it would start ringing again. Obviously, there must be some logical explanation. He was just too groggy to see it at the moment. The clock resumed its comforting ticking sound a moment later. Maybe the ringing had upset something internally, and it had reset. That had to be it. Feeling better, he quickly leapt out of bed and looked around his room for the long johns, thick socks, and sweater he would need. It took some time. Tidiness had never been one of his strong points. Finally, scavenging suitable attire, he opened the small window above his bed and climbed out onto the fire escape. The ancient ladder creaked in protest as Jonathan put his full weight on the steps and climbed up to the roof. Even though it was late April, his breath made little puffs of fog as he rooted around in the little maintenance shack near the fire escape for his favorite chair. He dragged the dilapidated chair out of the shack and around the front close to one of the last remaining functional streetlights, which provided just enough dirty yellow light to comfortably enjoy one of his many books. His apartment was at the end of J Street, and from it he could see most of the other buildings stretching up towards a bigger thoroughfare, named King Street. All the apartments were alike, except for one abandoned apartment just up from the corner of J and King Street, and a small grocery store on the opposite corner. The dilapidated apartment had been unoccupied for many years. The street was deserted at this most unusual hour of the morning. Settling into his chair, Jonathan took out the book he'd brought from his room, Fahrenheit 451. Jonathan's room was home to a number of books with topics ranging from classical literature to science, history, and science fiction. It was a compulsion he simply couldn't feed at school, and he'd taken to quenching it during the earliest hours of the morning. He had an uncanny knack for remembering everything he read, nearly word for word. Engrossed in his book, Jonathan didn't noticed the sun creep up and over the horizon until it shone directly on him, signaling the start of another life he led: school. Groaning, he got up out of his chair and dragged it back to the shack. As he did so, he noticed that Graham's mart was open and Mr. Graham was out front beginning to set up his stands. At nearly the same time, Jonathan noticed two teenagers walking down the street, one of them with a baseball bat and the other with a tire iron. It's Thursday. They shouldn't be here today. He wanted to call down to Mr. Graham to warn him, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. Mr. Graham had nowhere to run, and locking the door would only provoke more damage to the property. Mr. Graham's store was on a bi-weekly Wednesday collection route. Jonathan knew who ran it, and Mr. Graham kept up very well with the forced payments. The two teenagers were violating collection rules. Jonathan leapt up from his chair and made his way down the fire escape, past his room, all the way to the street below. He ran along the alleyway around his own apartment on to J Street and up towards the store. As he got closer, he could see he was too late. The two thugs approached Mr. Graham, one brandishing a menacing-looking tire iron. Jonathan hadn't brought anything with him, and the tire iron gave him pause, as did the fact that it was 2-on-1. He suddenly recalled his alarm clock seeming to stop when he had told it, and wished he could do the same thing here. Dissatisfied with whatever Mr. Graham had said, the boy with the tire iron rammed into the storekeeper's stomach, dropping him to the ground. Jonathan growled angrily as he watched, creeping slowly forward along the row of parked cars toward Mr. Graham. Gasping and coughing for breath, Mr. Graham cried out, "Leave the store alone! I can get money! Not now, but later this afternoon. I will go to the bank." The thug with the tire iron kicked Mr. Graham in the side, and then laughed. "Not good enough, man." Ignoring Mr. Graham's further cries, the two walked into the store. Jonathan heard the sounds of shelves being overturned and jars and cans of food falling and shattering on the ground. Jonathan ran to Mr. Graham and tried to help him up. The sounds of crashing inside the store made him wince as he tried to make sure that Mr. Graham wasn't too badly hurt. Jonathan looked up quickly when the two thugs came back out of the store. They stopped when they saw him. Each had a fistful of money, and one had taken a box of candy bars. They walked up menacingly, the one with the tire iron turning toward Jonathan. "Who are you?" he asked, cocking the tire iron for a quick strike if necessary. "Jonathan Smith," he replied, simply holding up his hands. Jabbing his tire iron towards Mr. Graham, the boy spoke. "Collection day's today, and he didn't pay," he said, snickering at his own rhyme. Jonathan knew it was a lie. He also knew that calling them on it would earn him a quick trip to the hospital, and little else. He said nothing, hoping they would just leave. He would deal with them later. He'd gotten close enough to memorize their faces. He helped Mr. Graham up to head back into a store. Behind him, the two boys laughed, obviously thinking Jonathan was a coward, and the one decided to throw his tire iron through the glass window. Jonathan and Mr. Graham put up their hands to ward off the glass shards. The two thugs laughed as they walked away with their spoils, stuffing the money in their pockets. Jonathan looked around the store helplessly. Mr. Graham slowly picked up a broom and began the cleanup. It hadn't been the first time his store had been tossed, but if Jonathan had anything to do with it, it would be the last. The rules were rules. He didn't always like them, and he especially hated enforcing them, but every now and again they had their use. He knew without them bad things easily became worse. He offered to help Mr. Graham for a while, but Mr. Graham refused and made him promise to get to school on time. Jonathan nodded and made his way back home, using the fire escape to get back into his room. He showered quickly, and then got dressed for the day, reenacting a charade he'd been keeping up ever since starting high school. He put on baggy jeans, a watch, and a stiff black belt, complete with a simple silver buckle. He connected a long silver chain from his wallet to a belt loop. He donned a large, trendy white sweatshirt and a hat which was twisted precisely at a slight angle, so the flat bill was nearly over his ear. He looked at himself in the mirror to see if everything was as it should be. Frowning, he noted he looked quite a bit like the thugs who just destroyed Mr. Graham's store. Ordinarily, Jonathan was able to forget he put on a costume every day. Today, however, he could only see what it really was, a lie. His green eyes stared back, daring him to believe he could continue living this way for much longer. Sighing as he finished putting together his ensemble, he grabbed a pair of white sneakers and ankle socks and headed downstairs for the kitchen. His mother Claire greeted him as he entered, hopping on one foot trying to get his sock on. "You know, it's lucky every sock you have is the same, or you might have trouble finding two that match in your garbage heap of a room," his mother Claire said as he entered the kitchen. "I planned ahead," Jonathan remarked sourly, trying unsuccessfully to put aside his earlier anger. "What's wrong?" Claire asked, straightening from where she had been bending over the sink, rinsing dishes. "Nothing," Jonathan replied, sinking into a chair. "Don't do that," Claire responded, sitting next to him. "Something's obviously wrong. You're usually in a much better mood when you get to read in the morning." "Mr. Graham's store got tossed this morning." Jonathan noticed his mother bite her lip, obviously wanting to ask a particular question he had no desire to answer again for what had been the 100th time. His face must have shown it, because she asked a different question instead. "Is he okay? I think his wife has been in the hospital for a while. Maybe I should go down and help him get things cleaned up," she asked. "He'll be all right. I helped him for a bit, and I'll check in after school. They broke his window, but other than that I think he'll have it mostly cleaned up pretty quick. You know him, grab a broom and get back to selling." Claire nodded and turned back to the sink. Jonathan watched her quietly, knowing she wanted to ask again about his duplicitous life. He watched her try not to show she wanted to cry as she scrubbed a plate. She was a pretty woman, with long, dirty blonde hair done up in a tight ponytail. She had blue eyes and full lips, and dimples which appeared whenever she broke into her easy, warm smile. She was dressed for work, jeans and a t-shirt, for cleaning rich people's houses. It wasn't the greatest paying job in the world, but it put food on the table. Jonathan ate a bowl of cereal quickly, and cleared his dish when he was done, eager to be out of the house and away from the uncomfortable silence. Promising his mom he would clean the kitchen properly when he got back from school, he grabbed his backpack and dashed down the stairs and out of the building. He ran down to the corner of J and King to catch the bus, which pulled up just as he got there. Claire watched Jonathan hurry down the street from a window in the kitchen. She worried about him getting further tangled in a horrible mess. Horrible messes seemed to be something of a family theme. Whenever she asked, he made excuses for his behavior. Any suggestions she offered had only gotten his back up. She couldn't risk him completely pulling away. As such, their relationship was occasionally strained, and though she believed Jonathan was doing fairly well, given the circumstances, was disappointed he didn't try harder. Sighing loudly, she finished her own breakfast before heading out to begin her day of work. It would be time soon enough to have a conversation with him which would turn his world completely on its head. But not yet.